Hello and welcome back to Active Creating. My name is Sarah and I'm going to guide you step by step on how to paint this beautiful artwork. This is the second of the 12-part series, Flora of the Zodiac. And in today's tutorial, we're going to paint Virgo. You will need to grab the template from my Etsy store and trace it onto your canvas before we begin, but I'll run you through that in the tutorial. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the other future artworks I release for this series, as we will continue to follow the Zodiac calendar, and I will release a new portrait monthly. I hope you've been enjoying this series so far. This painting is for any skill level, and I cannot wait to jump in and show you how to paint this beautiful artwork.
First thing I did was to get the A2 template, which is in 4 A4 sheets. I then took the top two and then placed them on top of each other. I placed my ruler along the crop marks of the paper and then just trimmed both of them at the same time with my Stanley knife. I then grabbed page 2 and 4 and then trimmed the long side. Using the other crop marks and the design itself, I then line up the template and then just use sticky tape to stick it all together. And then I've got my A2 size template. I used carbon tracing paper, placing 4 sheets down onto my canvas, which was a 12 by 16 size, making sure the dark side is face down. I then like to use a different coloured pen. I use a pink gel pen, and then I just go over all of my lines. Make sure not to use too much pressure along the skin tone area, just because I am using a lighter skin tone, but I did make sure my immediate outside edge was a bit harsher so I could see it with the background. I then removed the template and the carbon paper, and there's my beautiful transferred design.
So our template is traced, and before we can jump in and start painting, I'll run you through the brushes and the paints we're going to use. I have my largest flat brush. This is the one I like to use for backgrounds. You don't need one this size, it just makes it a lot easier when you have a nice wide bristle brush for such a large area. I mean, your canvas might be smaller, so it won't really matter, but just use the largest one you have. And then I have 2 other flat bristle brushes, one larger and one more of a medium size. And then I just have my round brushes. So one is slightly larger than the other. Probably won't use the smallest one too much, but it's always good to have just a nice fine detail brush. For paints, I have a large amount of white. I'm probably going to need more than that, but we'll see how we go. I've got yellow ochre, raw sienna, burnt umber. I've got these 3 at the top, which are going to be for my skin tone. So I've got a medium yellow, a medium red, and a medium blue. So it's probably like a cobalt blue. Then I have a bit of turquoise. I have a bit of viridian green. So it's more like a bluey dark green. And then I have my magenta, my nice big jar of water, and just my old tea towel. So now we're going to get into it, and we're going to paint our background first. There is a certain colour palette for Virgo. I'm going to stick to more of the earthy, natural colours. So that's a lot of greens, browns, creams, and some really muted pinks. Virgo is an earth sign, so by using that colour palette, I think it really represents the sign really well. If you're not painting it for a Virgo, or you're not a Virgo, that's fine too. Throughout the process of this artwork, I will always a certain color, and then I'll have different tones of that color. It's very easy to just paint whatever color palette you would like, but I'm just going to paint with these colors in particular. So I'm going to take my large flat brush, and I'm just going to put it in the water just to loosen up the bristles, get a little bit of moisture on there. I'm going to just wipe off the excess, and then I'm going to make my background color. So I'm going to do a very muted pink tone. So I'm going to need quite a bit of this. So I'm actually going to get a large chunk of my white. I'm just going to put it right in the middle there, just like that. And I'm going to get a little bit of the magenta and a little bit of the raw sienna. So you can see I've got a little bit of magenta on the corner and then a little bit of raw sienna. I don't have a lot. And then I'm going to mix that in with my white. And we'll get a nice light, more of a muted toned down pink. I don't want a really bright magenta like that, so we're using the raw sienna just to tone it down. Get a bit of water, helps to spread the paint. I'm going to tone it up a little bit more. A little bit more magenta and a little bit of raw sienna. Acrylic paint always dries darker than you think it will. I'm pretty happy with that colour. I get a bit more water on my brush. Got this nice large brush, so it's going to make painting this large area very quick. Now I'm just going to start at the top corner and work my way down. I'm not going to worry too much about going over the lines because I'm just going to paint over that anyway. And I'm also just crisscrossing my brush, just back and forth. You can paint the edges of your canvas if you like. I just paint the immediate edge. Oh, I'm going to paint all of the background to this one colour, and then I'm going to come back and add a little bit more extra detail. And I'm not too worried about going over the lines because I can still see my lines. I did use extra pressure around the immediate edge of my transfer because I knew I would be painting over it. That's a nice light pink. I don't want it to be one flat colour. I'm going to get a little bit more raw sienna, put it in the rest of my pink. And then I'm just going to go over little sections, not the whole thing, just crisscrossing a little bit of the raw sienna in a couple of little areas. I'm not really worried about getting that perfect blend. I like the brush strokes and the unevenness of the background. I think it adds a little bit more detail. So we're moving quite quickly because when the paint's wet, it just makes this process a lot easier. I might go a little bit darker down the bottom here. I'm going to get this little bit in between her hair. That's looking pretty good. The last thing I want to do is just get a little bit of white on my brush. And again, I'm just going to go over little patches with a little bit of white. I'm moving quickly again. By doing this, it'll make your background look a little less flat and it adds a nice little interest. I don't want a lot of detail because obviously the main focus is on our beautiful Virgo portrait. But by having a nice muted background really just helps to give the portrait a nice base. A bit more of a crisscross. Looks pretty good. I get a little bit more raw sienna. I do want to be able to see the separation of the two edges. This is my dark side, but this side's a bit lighter, so I might just put a little bit more raw sienna on this edge because otherwise you might lose the edge of the shoulder. I might just get a little bit more white just on the edge here because that's my dark side. A little bit more white. Just like to have a little bit of extra difference between the colours. Your paint is drying, just get a little bit of water on your brush and it'll help re-spread that paint. There we go. I think that looks great. So I'll wash my brush now. So I've just left my background to dry. I did use a bit of a heat gun just to speed up the process. And we're going to move on to her back, and that's all the skin tones we're going to make. So I'm going to run you through on how to mix the skin tone. I am using a lighter skin tone. You can see in my previous video with the Leo, I did use a darker skin tone. And as I progress through this series, I'm going to continue to use different skin tones. But because these portraits all have 5 different levels, so it makes it really easy to be interchangeable between the different skin tones. So if you do want to do this in a darker skin tone, all you need to do is just make sure that you have the 5 different levels of that darker skin tone. And you'll just be able to interchange them where you need, and then you'll be able to accomplish a darker skin tone on this portrait and vice versa. So to mix our skin tones, we're going to use the yellow, the red, and the blue. Skin tones are made up of these 3 colours. They're the primaries. It can feel a bit overwhelming when you're mixing skin tones, but I promise it's not as difficult as you think it's going to be. One thing I would recommend if you are new to mixing skin colours and you're a bit nervous about it, I highly recommend doing a little practice swatch, just like I have here. You can see I just had equal parts of both my yellow and my red, and then I had a quarter of the amount of blue, and I got a kind of raw sienna colour. I then just added white too, and then I got my 5 different skin tones. And then all we have to do is take those and then just paint them into the designated areas, and then you've successfully painted your portrait. So like I said, we are doing a lighter skin tone for this portrait. You can of course do whatever skin tone you like, as long as you have your 5 different tones of whatever skin color you're using, and then that way you just need to put whatever dark tone you've got in the dark section and continue on. So sticking to the lighter shade, I'm going to use my smaller flat brush just to mix my colors. I find it easier. So we're going to mix 5 different skin tones. I'm going to take a decent amount of yellow. I don't actually need a lot of paint. It's not really as much surface area to cover as, say, the previous one with the Leo. That was her whole back that we had to paint, but this is a much smaller area. But you just also don't want to run out of your skin tone. But if you've made too much, you can always just save your colors and then use them for another painting. I always like to keep the paints if I've made too much. That amount of yellow, and I'm going to use almost the same amount of red. Probably about that much. And then I'm using just a tiny bit of blue that's on my brush, and then I'm going to mix these 3 colors together. That looks pretty good. I might add a tiny bit of blue. I always like to add tiny bits of paint at a time, especially when it comes to skin tones. A little bit can go a very long way. That's pretty good, but obviously we're doing a lighter skin tone, so we need to make that lighter. I'm going to get some white. It's probably about 3/4 of the amount of color you've just mixed. For me anyway. You might need more or less. There we go. This is going to be my darkest shade. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to take half of that and put it just to the side here. I'm going to mix all of my colors together. And then I've got that amount, so I'm going to pretty much mix in the same amount of white. And this will be my second color. So again, I'm going to take half, put it to the side, and I'm going to get the same amount of white and mix that again. Half of that again, and the same amount of white again. You can see we're just repeating the process. So as long as you've got this first color correct, you just progressively add more white to get your 4 other skin tones. Perfect. And then again, I'm taking half of that to the side, and then the same amount of white again. This is our last skin tone, so this will be our lightest shade. Now you can see I have my 5 different skin tones. I've got my darkest down to my lightest. And for all of these Zodiac girls, you will need the 5 colors for whatever skin tone you're using. Okay, I've got my 5 tones ready to go. I haven't transferred the numbers onto my canvas, but you can always refer back to what colors go where. The higher the number, the darker the tone. This side here is the highest number, which is number 5, so this will be my darkest color. And then this side over here is the lightest, so this will be my lightest color. This is more of an oil painting style. Having all of your colors is not only easier, but it just makes the whole process more streamlined, and you can just grab the color as you go. You don't have to go back and then mix your color, and then it's a much easier process. So to start, I'm going to stick with my smaller flat brush, and I always like to start with the darkest color first. That is this one here. Now this is just the first coat, so it doesn't have to be too neat or too precise. Again, if we go over the hair or you go over these lines, it doesn't really matter. These are just guides. I do want to make sure that this line here is nice and straight, because this is her shoulder. You take your time with this edge. We're not going for perfect blending, but it doesn't matter if you go over the line, because we are going to paint over that anyway. And then you've just got this tiny little bit here. This is the back of her underarm or her armpit. So this is obviously darker because it's in more shadow. So I'm going to wipe the excess off my brush, and then I'm going to move to my second color. That's this bit in between the hair and then this whole section here. You can see what I mean. It's just so much easier having your colors ready to go. And you can definitely paint this whatever skin tone you like. As the series progresses, I will continue to do different skin tones. You can always refer to another video if you want to paint it a different tone than you have. Now I'm not going for super perfection either. I do like a more painty style. At the moment I'm just filling in those spaces. Perfect. Again, bring off that excess. Now we're going to move to our third color. That's the next space down. You can transfer the numbers onto your canvas if you prefer, but I didn't need to worry because I just referred back to my template and I'm not too stressed. Again, if you go over that section you've just painted, doesn't really matter. I'm going to come back for our second coat anyway. Again, wiping off that excess. Now I'm going to go to my second last color, and that is this last bit in here. Because I didn't put too much pressure on these lines, I'm able to paint over them pretty easily. If you're doing a darker skin tone, it won't matter so much, but because I'm sticking to the lighter palette, it makes it easier. Now with our second last color, we just need to come over and do this little section here, just on her left shoulder. Again, wiping off the excess. Now our last color, which is our very lightest, it's her left shoulder. So again, I'm going to take my time, just make sure this line is nice and straight. Now wiping the excess off my brush. So this is still drying, but I'm going to wash my brush off. And then I'm going to continue that same process with the same colors, but I'm going to start feathering the paint towards each other on the line. So we get a kind of rough blended ombre appearance. Now again, I'm not going for perfectionism here. This is a painting and I want it to look like a painting. So don't stress or don't worry too much about trying to get that perfect blend. Otherwise you'll be here forever. So again, second coat, getting that nice line on her right shoulder. And as I come down to the color next to it, I'm going to start just feathering. I don't have a lot of paint on my brush. I'm just going to feather a little bit into that section. Trying to keep the same shape as that line. I'm not too worried. These lines are just guides. They don't have to be perfect. And the same with this section under here where her arm is. Just feathering over that line into the next color. Wiping the excess off. You can wash your brush in between, but it's all the same color to me. And now we're moving into our second color again. So we work our way down. I'm going to paint this little section in here. And then the second coat, because this previous color is still wet, I'm going to just start feathering this color into it. Now you don't want a lot of paint on your brush as you're doing this. It's almost like you're using the paint that's already on the canvas rather than putting more on there. As you can see, because we're feathering in between the two, we will get that nice, almost blended effect. And then as we work our way down, I'm just going to feather some of this color into our next one so we can do the same thing. Wipe the excess off. Always come back to your darker color and do the same thing. Feather some of that back into your lighter one. If you've gone too far or if you feel like you need a little bit extra. But again, I'm not trying to go for the most perfect blended effect. So then again, I'll wipe the excess off, go into my third color, paint that in, and then feather that into the previous one. And also feather it down into the second. You can wipe the excess off your brush and just come back and feather that back into there. Paint does it all for you, and because we've got those nice 5 tones that are all blended so close together, it just makes this process so much easier. It's looking pretty good, and now I'm going to my second last color again. It's got the last bit here. Feathering that into my previous one. You can get a bit of water on your brush if you need, if your paint's too dry. But again, I like the painty effect. I'm not trying to go for the most perfect portrait. I like my paintings to look like paintings. It also takes a lot of pressure off you. I'm going to go back to my third color, blend a little bit more of that in there. Now again, we've just got this left side. It's our second color. Feather that into my lighter one, and then getting my last color, and then again, just going over it. So trying to get that nice straight line. Feather those in together. I'm going to use my second color. That goes next to this little shape here. I just want to accentuate this shape. So instead of blending that area, I'm going to actually do more of a solid line. This will be her arm. And that's it. That's her back. It was relatively quick. We had all of our colors ready to go, and it's just interchanging between the two and just feathering the colors into each other. So just make sure you don't have too much paint on your brush. You can always come back to it. You can always do an extra couple of layers. So you can see by having all of your 5 skin tones ready to go, and it's just a matter of painting the corresponding color in the right section and then just feathering in between the lines. My blending isn't perfect, and that's totally fine. I'm not going for perfectionism. I like that painty style. I do want it to look like a painting. So don't get too worried and don't get too disheartened if your blending isn't perfect, because honestly, it really doesn't matter when it comes to the finished painting. And also, by the time you do the top and the hair and the flowers, you're not even really going to notice the shoulders anyway. So just food for thought. Now that our back is done, we are going to move down to our top, and it's kind of like a ruffled edge top. Again, we're not going to try and paint every single ruffle. This is an impressionistic style painting, so we're going to keep it really loose. So we're going to use our large brush, because I think by using larger brushes, you're less inclined to feel restricted by the detail, and you're going to paint a little bit more loose and free. That's what we want to do. I'm going to put that in the water just to freshen it up a little. In terms of color, I am going to stick to my pastel light tones. I'm going for that really earthy, pastel, angelic vibe. So now we've already used pink for the background, so I'm going to use more of a green for my top. I am trying to stick to the Virgo color scheme. So I'm going to mix up a really, really, really light pastel turquoise color, but I also don't want the vibrancy of the actual turquoise. I want it to be a bit more muted. And to do that, I'm going to add some of the yellow ochre. And then I also need a lot of white. I'm going to mix it over here. That's too green, so I'm going to add a little bit more turquoise. I want more of a blue shade, so a bit more of that turquoise. Now I've got my nice light turquoise color. It's really nice. I want that to be much lighter. I'm going to get more white. I'm going to mix a little bit on the side here, a little bit more. Not too much surface area to cover, but I don't want to run out of the color. I'm probably going to mix 3 shades. I've just added some more white. And then wiping the excess off using what's on my brush. And then I'm going to get even more white, and this will be my lightest shade. So again, it's just mixing one color and then adding white. So you could paint this top whatever color you like. Just start with the one color and then just make lighter tones of it. And add a bit of water for that. And my skin tone is obviously dry, and I've just put my palette in the middle there. Bit of an easier view. I'm using my lightest color first, and I'm going to just paint in the rough shape of the shirt. I'm going to go around these little areas here because these are the darker shades. Again, I'm not too worried about perfectionism here. I just want to get this color on. I can still see my lines through my paint, so that's good. Paint this bottom edge here as well. I'm coming all the way over to this edge here. Because I'm using my lightest color first, this will just give me a really nice base that I can then go back and add my darker tones and some highlights. If your lines are lighter than mine and you feel like your paint is covering them, just maybe go around the shape itself rather than right over the top of it. That way you won't lose your lines. These lines are really just guides. But this section under here is a bit dark, so I'm going to go back to my darkest color, and I'm going to just paint in that dark shade under there. And then I'm going to use my second color. I'm just going to paint the edge of her top here on the right side. That's good. I'm just going to wash my brush. And I'm also going to use my second color just to paint in these sections here, because they're like kind of the way the fabric is folded in and there's a shadow where the fabric is. I'll even add a little bit of the darker shade just to accentuate that a bit more. See, I'm not really worried about the lines. It's just a matter of placing the paint in that roundabout area. I'm just going to soften that edge a bit with the brush with no paint on it. And now I'm going to come back and start adding some lighter areas. I'm going to go with straight white, and because my top is still wet, this is going to help it all blend and mesh together really well. I'm going to just add a little bit of white on this edge. And I'm just going to work my way around. There's a little bit just on here. So we're trying to do a loose impression of ruffled fabric, but I'm not painting every single ruffle, and I'm not worried about creating too much detail. It's just adding a couple of little white areas and a couple of little dark areas. Because again, the top isn't the main focal point. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, nor am I too worried about all the detail. There's a ruffle here between these two lines. Just going to put white right on there because my paint's still wet. If your paint isn't wet, you can come back in with your lighter color. Also a little bit of white here. I'm just doing brush strokes of white, kind of skipping a space where the darker shade is, and then I'm just using straight white just on there. And then you can use your lighter color just to soften that edge a little. If you like, it's up to you. And the same with this area here, another bit of white. Then moving on, skipping a space, doing the white on this area here. My paint's a bit dry now, so I'm actually going to go back in with my lighter colour. Just go over that a bit. I'd actually get a bit of my second colour. I'm just going to soften this edge a little, darker area where my next ruffle is. And I'm actually going to use my light colour. I just want this edge to be a little bit sharper. Looking pretty good. You can see we've worked our way along. I'm not doing anything too difficult or too crazy. Again, using the larger brush really helps you paint a little bit more free. This area, I'm just going with my light color, and I'm just going to go over this ruffle a little bit, bring that line around to meet the one on the left of it. And then coming back in with my second colour, just going to soften that edge a little bit. It's kind of like what we did with the skin tones. We're using one colour next to each other and we're just feathering them into each other. And then because this is the darker side, this is the more shadowed side of her, I'm going to use my second colour and I'm going to go over just this right side here. Again, like lines aren't perfect, you know, I've gone over my outlines, I'm not too worried. And I'm going to get my darker colour. I'm just going to accentuate this seam here, just under this area, because we'll come back and do the kind of ruffled edge. And the second coat of the second colour just on the base here. I might actually get some of the darker one again and just accentuate this bottom edge. I've just turned my brush to use the point of it, and I'll just do a little bit of a brush of a dark colour down there. I might just get a little bit more of a dark colour and just do a little bit under where the seam is, because this would be shadow, so I'm just dabbing the darker colour just under that area there. I'm not going to add too much on this side because this is my lighter side, but I might just do a little bit of a darker shade just under there. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because this will all be covered in hair anyway. I'm just using my darkest colour again, and I just want to put a little bit of a line here on the second ruffle, and then maybe a little bit there. So this just helps to accentuate the ruffles and bring them a little bit more forward. I'm just going to soften those edges with my second colour. You can see that you don't have to use the same colour I have. As long as you have the 3 different shades of whatever colour you're doing, you can paint this top in whatever colour you like. And I'm going to keep those light. I'm just going to get a little bit more white on my brush. Just a couple of little extra white highlights. Definitely on this edge here. You can swap to smaller brush if you like, but I'm going to stick to my large one. Less inclined to spend a lot of time on it. I'm not blending these, I'm actually just adding some highlights on the top. That's all I'm doing. I might just add a little bit of a white highlight on this section of this ruffle. This helps to bring it a bit forward. I'm going to put the white in the middle here. And a bit of white there. That's it, I think. That looks pretty good. That's all I'm doing. Now, before we move on, I'm just going to move my palette up a little. I'm going to swap to my smaller flat brush. There's obviously the seam. There isn't any real detail to it. We're going to stick to the same sort of effect we did at the bottom of this top. And I'm going to use my lighter color first. I'm going to start at the left side. I'm going to go around her shoulder. And I'm just going to dab the color along the seam. I don't want it too chunky. So there's her hair there, so I'll skip that. This will create the illusion that there's a bit of an elastic seam. I'm going to come around the right side of her shoulder. I'm going to go a bit higher than the ruffled shirt. It makes it look like it goes around her arm. I'm just still using the same color and I'm just dabbing my brush along that edge. Wash your brush, I'm just going to wipe it off. And then I'm going to work my way up into the darker shades. So I'm going to get my second color. And I'm not going to do as much as my lighter color. And then I'm just going to come along the edge and I'm going to dab little parts of my darker shade. And I'm trying not to make sure I have big clumps of paint. Some of this, the hair will be painted over anyway, and I don't want big clumps of paint underneath that. And that's it for that. I'm going to wash my brush. And then with my clean brush, I'm going to get my darkest color. And then again, I'm going to come along this whole section, but I'm going to dab a lot less again. I'm going to use less color again. You don't have to go in the same spots as you did with the previous colors. It's a little bit of extra detail. I'm going to make this underside darker rather than lighter. I'm going to use my darker color just to go over that lighter area. Now you can let that dry, but I'm going to go straight in with some white. And this is just the highlights. So I think there'll be more on this side, just how we did with the bottom. I'm just going to dab some little white dots along the seam. I'm not going to do too many, just want a couple here and there. And I probably won't go past this area here, just because that is the darker side of her. Now this is an optional step, but I think it makes a difference. I'm going to use my larger round brush and I just want to soften this edge. So it's clean, it's got a little bit of water on it, but I've wiped the excess off on my towel and I'm just going to soften this edge. I'm just going along and dabbing that edge of where I've just painted with my brush. If you get too much paint on your brush, just wash it off and start again. And it just helps to soften that edge so it's not quite as harsh. And I'll do a little bit on this left side here as well. Your paint might already be dry and that's fine too. You can always just do a nice soft edge with a little bit of extra paint. So now the bottom half of our portrait is done. We can now move up to the top and do her hair. My portrait's going to have brunette hair, and I'm also going to do the same as what I've been doing. I'm going to mix a few different tones so I can just grab the paint and put it straight onto the canvas. The first thing I'm going to do is give the hair a base coat, and I'm going to take my burnt umber and mix it with some of my raw sienna. Put a bit of water in there as well. This is going to give me a nice mid-tone brown. It's perfect for the base of my hair. A bit of water. I'm using my large flat brush just so I can paint all of this reasonably quickly. Now I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to paint in top of her head. I'm going to go around my leaves and my flowers. Not too fast if I go over the line. The flowers are obviously going to be the last thing we paint. This doesn't have to be perfect, it's just really to get a nice base coat before we start doing the extra colours. Now the top is done, I'm going to just come down here, paint the bottom half of her hair. I'm using the end of the brush and turning it parallel to the line. It gives you a nice even line. So now that my base coat is done, I can move on to my other colors. I'm going to wash my brush off. And again, you're going to want to create 3 to 4 tones. I'm going to probably just do 3. I'm just going to use my straight brown paint. But again, no matter what color you're doing, you just need 3 different tones of it. For my darkest color, I'm going to use my burnt umber just as is. And then I've got my raw sienna as is as well. And then I'm going to create a raw sienna and yellow ochre color, and this will give me a nice golden brown color. I'm happy with that. Sticking to my large flat brush, again, it really just helps to prevent you from getting too restricted with your brush strokes and to making it too complex for yourself. And I'm going to go straight in with my burnt umber. So I'm going to just accentuate some of those darker areas with my darkest color. And I'm just using my straight burnt umber as my dark color. Putting a little bit of water in there. Now, because the light is coming from this direction, so I want to try and emphasize the shadows on this side. So using the dark color, I'm going to start bringing this up from just above the flowers on this side, because this will be the darker side. And as we start to do the second coat, I'm going to make sure that all of my brush strokes are in the direction of her hair. So you want to start to emphasize those shadows and those highlights. But by making sure that you're following the direction of where her hair will be, this will help to create the illusion of her real hair. And then I'm going to emphasize the dark on this side, heading towards the part of her hair. You can swap brushes if you're more comfortable, but I'm going to stick to my large flat brush because you can actually turn it lengthways and you can create long, thin brush strokes with your flat brush. And I'm going to start creating the dark areas of the bottom of her hair. So all of this would be more shadowed because the flowers would be casting the shadow. So I'm just going to start creating the impression of longer strands of hair. We're not painting every strand of hair, and you don't actually need to, because as we build up the different colors and the different layers, the paint will do it all for us, and the brush strokes will help to create the illusion of that happening anyway. I'm just going to bring a bit of burnt umber down the bottom here. Again, we're just building up those layers. When you start to come to the ends of the hair, so with these curls and things, these are just guides. As you start bringing more color into it, you will start to just bring the paint past it. And by lifting the brush as you bring it up, you'll start creating all of these nice little ends of hair. Otherwise, it'll look too cartoony. So I'm still using my burnt umber and I'm just starting to bring those colors out. So it's just almost like a little flick. Be the same for when we come down. I'm not going to add too much down at the end as I want the lighter hair to be at the end, but I'm just going to start accentuating those strands. And I'm just doing little flicks at the end, and I'm holding my brush lengthways, my brush vertically to the canvas rather than horizontal, and then that will give me my pointed angle at the bottom. So as I bring the paint down and just lift up and even flick up, you'll see that it will just start to create some really nice extra details of hair. So I'm going to wash my brush now, and then sticking to my flat brush, I'm going to go back in with my base coat, which was the burnt umber and the raw sienna. So this would be my middle tone, whatever color you're painting, my mid-tone brown. I might actually add a little bit more raw sienna into it so it has a bit more of a difference than the base coat, but it's still predominantly the same color. A bit more water. And as we work our way through the colors into the lighter tones, you start adding less paint. So starting at the top again, do a couple of little highlights. So again, I'm following the shape of her head and the direction of where her hair will be falling. So this side will obviously have more of a highlight. This is obviously the light side of her head. You might find it easier with your round brush, really up to you, but I just like to use a larger brush because I think when you have your round brush, you're more inclined to do every little stroke. But if you keep your brush large, you'll keep your areas of highlights in different shades bigger. Now the same with this. So this is obviously the light side as we come down to the bottom of her hair. Also going to make sure I try and keep that wavy look of her hair. So all the lines I do, rather than just painting for one solid section, if I see an area I want to paint, I'm going to do a little twisty line. So you'll see as we start to build up the layers, and we're now creating lighter areas, and it'll just start to really bring the hair to life. You also don't need to paint one line from the top all the way down. Just a few squiggly lines and then bring it over to another area. You can also start at the bottom. You don't have to start at the top. So I might actually start at the bottom here and then work my way up. When I'm using my larger brush, I'm creating these nice big highlighted areas on her head. You can start flicking little areas of hair so it's not so contained into the one specific area. You can see you don't need to paint every single hair strand. By just working up those layers, you'll create the impression of a full head of hair with some really lovely highlights. And I'm just going to bring it down the bottom here, just extend some of that out. And I'm going to keep this right side more of a darker tone. So I'll probably only do a little bit of the raw sienna after this on this side, maybe a couple of little extra highlights. But I want to keep this side more on the dark side as it is in shadow. I'm also using more of a watery mix now, so I can start adding some lighter little flicks of hair coming off the side of her head. I'm just going to start flicking off some little areas now. You can swap to your round brush, which we will do eventually, just to add the couple of extra little details, but I'm going to keep using my large brush. I go back in with a bit of my burnt umber there. A couple of extra little bits of burnt umber at the top here. I think it's a little bit too light. Again, trying to follow that direction of her hair. I'm going to wash my brush off, and now I'm going to go straight in with my raw sienna. I'll add a little bit of water to that. Sticking to my large flat brush, and I want a bit of highlight on the right side here. Feeding that out, and then a bit more of a highlight down here, following that curve of her head, and then that highlight on this side as well. The lighter we go, the less of it we're doing. Same down here, add a little squiggle there, little squiggles here. You don't have to do full squiggles either, it could be just like a nice little shape. We're just continuing to build up those layers. Now, I'm not going to do too much on this side, might just do a little bit here. I'm not painting every hair strand, no need to do that. You're just doing little sections of highlights, and as you build up those layers, you'll start to create the impression of a full head of hair. And I'm just flicking out the bottom here, just with my raw sienna. It's almost like a little flick of the wrist. Works better when your paint has melted ice cream consistency. Just flows a lot better. You can even work your way up from this end rather than down. So I want to get a little bit of a nicer edge on this, on the ends of her hair. So I just want to flick that up. When we come back with our final detail, we can fix all of these bits up, but we're pretty happy with that. Now we're going to go into our lightest colour, which is the yellow ochre and the raw sienna. It's a nice golden brown colour. Now, I'm not going to use a lot of this. I don't think it needs a lot. I will, of course, do a little bit at the top here. I'm just turning my brush so I can get that nice fine direction. Same on this side. Use the brush you're more comfortable with. So a little bit on that side there. Now I'm going to come down. Again, I'm not going to do a lot. A couple of little squiggles. I want to get some on this side. I might actually have this section going over the point here. So that is actually sitting behind this clump of hair. Actually turning my brush diagonally as well, and that's going to give me some really nice shapes. Just doing a couple of little touches here and there. And you'll see our hair is just slowly coming to life. Highlights really do make a difference. And I think that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do too much. And that's it. So I'm going to put my large brush in my water, and then I'm going to come to my round brush. And this is where I'm just going to add a couple of little details. I just want to fix up the top. And I'm just not happy with that shape, so I'm just going to add a bit of the burnt umber. And then as well, follow that shape, burnt umber and some raw sienna. I just want to try and capture that shape at the top of her head again. The same with this side here. Just a little bit. I don't want to add too much. It's pretty good as it is. The same with the bottom of her hair. It's got a bit more of the raw sienna. And just going to do some little flecks. So by switching to a smaller brush, you can change the width or the style of your hair. So it just adds an extra little dimension. Again, don't go too overboard. You don't need to do a lot. You can actually get some really nice fine points. So it just helps to add a little bit extra to that hair. Just going to start feathering out the ends. I'll put a little bit on this side. I don't think it needs too much more. Don't want to overwork it. But if there are any points or ends of hair that you've done that you just want to add a little bit of a fine point to, this is the brush that will definitely help you do that. Go back in with my burnt umber. I do want to try and keep this end darker. I think she's looking pretty good. Just add a couple of extra little squiggles just in here. I might just bring up those areas just a little bit. A bit of burnt umber. I just want to create some squiggles with the darker brown while I have this brush so it doesn't look so flat. The ends of her hair. I'm actually going to do one more thing. I just think it needs a little bit of highlights. I do love my highlights, you know that. And I'm going to get a bit of white, a bit of my burnt umber, a bit more there, get some water. I'm going to add a bit of the raw sienna actually. I want it to look grey. Now I'm just going to do a couple of little, a bit too much paint on my brush. Same on this side, I'm just going to do a couple of little flecks. Really not doing much. This is really tiny, tiny details. Soften it with my finger. Another little trick. And I definitely think this side needs an extra little bit of highlight. So be sure to follow those nice wavy curls. And then really not doing much of this, just a couple down the bottom here. Even just highlight some of these already existing colours because these are obviously the lighter colour of her hair. Adds a little bit more oomph to it. While I'm here, I'm just going to use my dark skin colour. Just going to fix the right shoulder because it's meant to come up a bit more. I don't think I had my line coming up enough. It's just a bit too flat. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our beautiful flowers. So the flowers that represent Virgo are chrysanthemums, and I've got 4 here in a beautiful flower crown. You can, of course, paint these whatever colour you like. I'm going to do them more of a peach apricot colour, just because I think if I did them pink, it would be a bit too pink on pink because of my background. I'm going to use my round brush, and I'm going to get some yellow and mix a little bit of magenta in there. And then I'm going to add white. I do want a nice light apricot colour. That's a bit too orange, so I'm just going to add more magenta. Now I've gone too pink, I might add a bit more yellow. Got to find that nice balance between the two. Pretty good. I'm going to just pull it a little bit off to the side there, and I'm going to get more white. Again, we'll mix, I think it's still a bit too orange actually. A bit more magenta in there. A bit more magenta. Don't need too much. A little bit will go a very long way. A nice base colour. A bit more white. Make sure I have plenty of this colour. Pretty good. Get a little bit more down here, and then I'm going to mix in some white, probably double the amount of white. A nice light apricot colour. Again, I've got my 3 tones. I'm actually going to halve this and I'm going to make 4. Not sure if I'll use it. Really nice light colour. There we go. Just going to wash my brush off. Now I want to give my flowers a nice base coat, so I'm actually going to use my second colour. And I'm going to paint the inside. I'm not going to go too close to the edge. This will be a nice dark colour for the centre of the flower. I'm going to do that for all of them. And now we're going to work in layers for our flowers. So these ones on the side are facing outwards and they are actually sitting behind these ones. So they're the ones you're going to want to do first. I'm going to start with the left one. And because this is obviously the light side, I'm going to use my lightest colour. I'm going to get a decent amount on there. Now there are so many different types of chrysanthemums. So we are trying to be impressionistic and not so realistic, so you can actually have a bit of freedom and really just have fun doing this. Now they're just made up of lots and lots of little petals. That's what we're going to try and emulate. And I'm going to start in the middle of my flower. I don't want to go too far past my line, otherwise they'll get a bit too big. And I'm just going to drag my brush down. And we're just going to continue to create really nice length of petals. And you're going to do that top row first. So this is the profile of the flower. You can even add a little bit of white on the tips of this colour. Don't be afraid to get a couple of different colours on your brush at the same time. This will help to create a really lovely effect. Even twist your brush, make a little S shape. And I'm going to come down. So this is my leaf here, so I don't want to paint over that. I'm just creating that first row. I'm going to swap to the shade down. Now we're starting to get a little bit darker, probably more in shadow. And you can have them coming off different directions. Try not to make them completely symmetrical. Flowers are always organic and a bit misshapen. You don't want to create this perfect dome shape. You want a nice organic shape. This is my leaf here, so now I'm going to stop. So that's my first row. And then the next row, I'm going to actually swap in between colours. And I'm just going to bring it down slightly. And I'm going to start doing my second row. But I'm also going to bring petals up higher and then some down lower. I might actually skip a space and then come back to it because all the petals overlay differently. It just helps to create a much more organic looking flower. Now I'm just putting different colours on my brush. Now I've just come down to my last leaf. I might actually get a little bit of white. I might have a couple little bent ones. I might actually add just a little bit of darker down the bottom here. And that's the left one done. That's all I'm going to do. So now I'm going to jump over to the right side and I'm going to do the same as what I just did there. So you can see I turned my canvas around because it was a lot easier for me as a right-hander to drag the brush to the right. I also tried to stick to more of the darker peach colours rather than the light ones because this one is in shadow. It's just a nice little thing to keep in mind. So we're just going to do the little bud here as well. Nice little unopened flower. Nothing really special about it. I'm just going to grab a couple of little colours at a time. Just do a couple of little lines together to make a nice little bud shape. Get a bit of my darker colour, get a couple of little petals in there. There we go. Now before we move on to these last two, we need to do the foliage. So there's green leaves. And that is what our viridian green is for. With my clean brush, it's very blue-green. I might get a little bit of yellow and I might even get a bit of the yellow ochre. I really do want this to be more pastel. I don't want everything to be super bright. Use my green, my yellow and a little bit of the yellow ochre. A little bit of water on my brush. Leaves aren't too difficult to paint. I've lost most of my outline, but I'm just going to paint one little line down the middle here. And then I've got a little prong comes off the side, and then another little prong, nice little arms. That's about it really. Don't need a lot of detail. You can actually get a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow. Put some multiple colours on your brush. You don't have to mix the colours together, but when you paint, it's going to create a really nice effect of multiple colours in the one brush stroke. Just going to do that leaf again because that one's sitting on top. And we've got our last leaf down here. Actually bring that down a bit further. I'm just doing little lines all meeting together at one point just behind this main flower. And there's a nice little leaf coming out the back here. A bit more of the dark green in here, add a little bit more on this side. And wait for your flower to dry, finding it you're dragging too much of that paint into your green, but I'm using a lot of paint on my brush. You don't have to worry about it. I might just put a little bit behind this flower here. I like the touch of green. Adds a bit more life to it. Now, of course, the last thing we need to do is give our little bud a bottom, plenty of green on there. And I'm just going to do a little, it's almost like a little fork that holds our little bud. And then it's just the drag down of the stem. Just going to clean this line up. I want it to be a bit thinner. Turn my canvas around, shave some of that green off just with my clean brush. It just helps to make a more delicate stem, I think. Before I move on, I just want to add a little bit of a highlight on this leaf. It looks a bit flat. It's a bit of yellow and a bit of white. It just helps to break up the flatness. I might just bring up a little leaf there. Looked a bit too perfect. So now you're going to want to let that dry because otherwise you won't be able to do your next flowers. So you can let that dry, have a little break. I'm going to use my heat gun. Just want to put a little bit of a highlight on this bud here. Looks a little bit flat. Now our last flowers are just these two. So this one actually sits underneath this one. So we're going to do this one first. And to make sure that we don't have two eyeballs looking at us, so the center of the flower isn't just pointing directly at us, I'm going to slightly off center them. I'm just going to do just a little circle. And this will help me with the direction of my petals. So instead of having them both straight in the center, which I think would look wrong, this helps me to have the center of them in a different direction. And again, I'm going to start with probably my lightest color because we are on this side. And I'm just going to do the same again and work my way around the flower, but work my way into the center. So now we've just got our last flower to do, and I'm going to continue on doing exactly what I've just done, but with this one, and have it centered more towards this angle. Just going to go around and add extra little petals where it needs it. Now the last thing I'm going to do is get some white on my brush, straight white, and I just want to add a couple of little highlights. So this side especially, it's a bit lost with the pink background. I'd actually get some of this lighter apricot. And you get a bit of white on this edge. I don't need too much of this. I want to add a bit of white on my little flower bud here. Going to get a little bit of lighter green. I think my leaves are a bit too one color, so I just want to add just a hint of the lighter green. Not all over, just some sections, like it's a bit lost. There we have it. That's our beautiful flower crown. So I'm going to dry my flowers now so I can do my last step, which is my beautiful gold tattoos.
Once your canvas is dry, you just need to refer back to your template. I have carbon paper, so I can just trace the tattoos straight onto the back. But if you didn't use the carbon paper method, or if you don't have any, I'm going to show you another way you can do it. You just need a lead pencil. I would recommend at least an HB. Something higher would be even better. But you just need to turn your template over, find where your tattoo is, and then just shade in that entire section with your lead pencil. This is going to react in the same sort of method as the carbon paper would. It just won't transfer the line as dark. Once that is shaded in, you just turn it over, and then you just need to work out the placement of your tattoo. So just keep in mind the extra overhang of the hair. So I just like to place my template down and then just lift the page over just to get a rough idea of where it's sitting. And then once I am happy with where it is, I then just use my gel pen again and just trace the tattoo. Once it's traced, you can just lift off your template and you'll see there's a very light transfer of where the lead has left its mark. Obviously this won't be as dark as the transfer paper, so you just got to keep that in mind. It will work on painted darker skin tones, it just won't leave as much of a mark. The other method is just to use the carbon paper. You just place that underneath, dark side down. Again, you just need to lift the pages just to make sure that your tattoo is sitting in the right position. And then you just repeat and grab your pen and trace your tattoo. Once that's done, you lift everything off and you can see that there is a lovely little transfer of your tattoo. When it comes to colouring in your tattoo, you can of course use paints and choose whatever colour you like. Just make sure you use a nice fine brush, but I like to use a really nice gold pen. This one creates more of a gold foil finish and it's perfect for these sort of tattoos. I just love the effect the gold gives it. It makes it a lot easier to use a pen when you're doing such fine lines, and it works really well on the canvas.
Now once the tattoos are done, just have a quick check and see if there's anything you want to touch up. Might be an extra little bit of hair, because now that everything's dry, it might be a bit dark. I might actually even just add a couple of extra little highlights. Just always nice to just give it one more once over, just if it needs it. A little bit more of the dark brown, following that shape of the head as well. I think it needs a little bit more at the top. And then maybe an extra down here, just to get these highlights for that side. And that's it. I'm pretty happy with that. So now that I've finished, the very last thing I'm going to do is sign my masterpiece. I always like to sign in the bottom right corner. I'm going to sign with straight turquoise, I think, with a little bit of white in there. Make sure it's that beautiful creamy consistency. You want it like melted ice cream. It's going to make doing your signature or your initials a lot easier. I always like to initial. You'll be able to see my signature, so I'll probably go just a bit higher, and I use very light pressure. There we have it. Thank you so much for joining me for the second of my 12-part series, Flora of the Zodiac. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the other future artworks I release for this series. I also have more templates and tutorials, as well as template-free tutorials you can paint along with me right here on my YouTube channel. So be sure to check those out as I'm continuing to release new artworks every week. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.